too much to hope that when I leave it's going to be 70 degrees?
Oh, you're very hilarious.
Might need to wait a day or two for that.
A day or two.
I heard 2 days.
2 days?
70.
Okay.
I think
Yesterday
it's
was, 70.
Like you said, it's not the chill or the heat that it's just there's no consistency
No,
whatsoever. It just doesn't exist.
Can't acclimate. Be comfortable.
I'll go check the trauma.
Forward and go backwards to upward.
Yeah.
Always love the amount of technology you guys have here. It's great.
But all when it's working, it is. Yeah. Yeah, so it's the key.
Gone wrong a couple of times in classes, but these speakers, I still just, I don't know what to think of these things.
Yeah, there.
All right, I think we'll go ahead that way. Folks join us great. So, hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for another event as part of offering some career services. We're really grateful today to be able to have Daniel Giers with us, a counseling graduate from 2 years ago, and talking really about a very important subject, and that is the roles as a client and a clinician. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Daniel. If you need anything, let us know. We do have folks online and folks in the room. If you're online, make sure your lines are muted. Hopefully you can hear us and see the screen. We will manage questions through the chat box, and then, of course, we'll kind of have natural breaks either at the end or wherever makes sense for you. Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining me today. My name's Daniel Giers, as you said. I'd like to thank, of course, the Naomi Ruth Cohen Foundation, because they kind of fight and battle for pretty much what I believe to be the most important thing in the world, and ending this thing. A lot of individuals ask me why not work for things like, cancer or AIDS and stuff like that. All, noble, very important, but it's kind of an issue that we look at, and it's around us all the time. And some of the most recent stats say that at any point in time, about 60 million people in our country alone are undergoing, something that is clinically diagnosable, meaning that it is something that's, severe enough to, be considered an issue. And obviously, we always kind of think about even one person suffering is bad enough, but, we have to ask over and over, if this is such a big thing, why do we never talk about it? So the foundation, works on what I do believe is the most important thing, because at any point in time, you can ask people on the street. And so, we pass people on the street, and, they could be going through things that we can't even fathom or imagine, and, here we are, we just don't ever discuss it. And it's just something that, I feel that's very important. So as most of us probably know, last week was National Mental Health Awareness Week. And the interesting part about that is I actually introduced that to several of my clients and some of the colleagues in my own setting, and they're like, it's national what now? And it's kind of shocking to me. It's a bit upsetting, both from a personal view and, professional. Today, to kind of begin, I'm going to ask you to allow me to break 2 rules. Okay. The first rule is I'm actually going to introduce myself 3 times in the next couple of minutes. Now, I know you're thinking that's the class 10, level narcissism, and it's partially true, but hopefully by the time I introduce myself the third, you'll actually see why I chose to go that route. The other rule I'm going to break, I'm actually going to introduce to you in a moment when we get to that point, and you'll see why. So, for the very basic introduction of myself, as I said, I'm Daniel Giers. I graduated the MACP program back when I believe it was called MAC here at Chicago School. Had a really wonderful time there, great experiences. And I do not get paid to say that. It's actually just, terrific time here. But so I'm an LPC. I'm about 7 months away from going clinical if I pass that test. And to be quite frank, that's scarier to me than the LPC test. So if you're facing that, don't worry. You'll be well prepared by the time you get there. Once I do become clinical, of course, I'll move up, and then the QMHP and my name will drop, and I'll be LPHA, and then I'll get probably an extra $1 at work. So, yeehaw. Currently, I'm an MBA student at Southern Illinois. If anybody asks, I am not actually part of the swimming and diving team. It's just, trying to do some pride and show off a little bit. So, okay. So, introduction number 2. One of the things that we like to do, and if you...
Oh, you know what, Charlie, you click into
things that we like to do sometimes, for those of you who are in internship or practicing, when you find somebody that's having a very difficult time, getting through and opening up and talking about themselves, we like to do a little game called Who Are You? And it becomes very rapid fire as you go through, but basically what you do is you'll ask a question and say that you have to give me an answer. It can be one word, it can be a sentence, and the rules are you have to answer as fast as possible, and you can never repeat an answer, And you'll see it kind of gets, very strange when you begin. Who are you? My name is Joe. And I'm like, okay, who are you? And you keep going over and over, and they have to give you something. And by the time they come down, they'll start finding things they like about themselves. I'm a strong person. I'm a devoted husband. These sorts of things. So I decided to ask myself that. And so here's part 2 of the narcissism, if you're ready for it. So I asked myself, who am I? And you can answer this in so many ways. I'm sure if you actually spent time, you could pick hundreds, maybe even thousands of little factors about your life and make that who you are. So some of the personal things, I'm a husband, I'm a brother, I'm a son, I'm a father, sort of, and I'll show you why in a moment. And then you can kind of also talk about who you are in the professional life, or, more so in your career, such as I am a therapist, I am a student, as I mentioned, MBA student, I'm an advocate for a lot of different things, all sorts of rights, whether it be class, LGBT, whatever it might be. I'm a veteran of the Air Force. So if you're interested, here's the picture of my daughter. We're still working on the paternity test, but I'm pretty sure she's mine. So now I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself in a new way, and this is going to be number 3. So I'm going to ask you to allow me to break my second rule. So I ask myself again, who am I? And we're going to play a little game here. I'd like to see if anybody as a student or practitioner, if you can pick these out completely. Now, I don't want you to just pick out the very basics of it. So who am I? Anybody know what this is? DSM-4, by the way. I don't think it's changed yet to the 5, but anybody happen to know at least the very beginning, the 296? Nope. Okay, come back in a second. This one, usually, sometimes people get this one, but how about this? No? Okay. 296.52, and this is where I ask you to allow me to break the rule, because so many times through this school you'll hear we really do our best not to try to describe somebody as their disorder. And it's funny because you think about it, if I were to come into the hospital and I'd say, okay, Dan, you've got a schizophrenic in bed 14. Or, Dan, you've got a 25-year-old white male who's suffering a psychotic episode, has a history of schizophrenia. So what's the difference between the two? It's the same message for the most part. But if you think about it, when you put that title in front of them before everything else, this is my schizophrenic patient, right? Even just immediately, without it being before the word go, you're putting a label on that person. Now, it might be true. These things that are on the screen are true about me. But you're automatically stating that this is my intent, that I am going to reach you as a person, that I want to keep my distance, your diagnosis, I'm here just to give you a little bit of information and walk away. But then when you say, I've got a 25-year-old white male who's having a psychotic break, needs a little bit of help, it's much softer, it's much more personal. Or you could just say, I've got Mr. So-and-so. So here's my answers. 296.52, bipolar disorder, most recent episode, depressed moderate. So that's part of my third introduction. I do suffer from bipolar disorder, and I have for about 20 years. 300.02, generalized anxiety disorder. So it's really interesting when you walk around, and we're going to get into this in a few minutes, and you walk around on a day-to-day basis knowing these little numbers and codes and titles about yourself, and you wonder, what's the purpose? So before I get to that, I'm going to talk a little bit about my day. So as you can see, I put a little bit of time. I have kept it down as much as possible. But 6:30 a.m., I wake up, shower, shave, clean, usually feed the cat because by 6 o'clock they're usually meowing and howling in my ear saying, "Do you want food?" Why? Because we actually raised them very poorly, and now we're basically dependent on them and not the other way around. 7:30 a.m., I get to work. I actually get there a half hour early because I'm a very Zen-based person, and I don't want anybody else to talk to me. I just want to prepare and get ready. Prepare for my group sessions, individual sessions, do paperwork. Currently, I work in IDHC, Individual Behavioral Health and Criminal Justice. So we actually have mostly parole and probation clients, but a few clients that are all homeless and in our shelter system. And we work on substance abuse, and then my, I guess what I call specialty, PTSD, some pretty on there, and usually do a little bit of reading, completely non-academic because I like to divorce myself from homework, and then I go to bed at 10. So it's pretty standard. You know, wake up, do your work, go home, go to bed, you know, spend time with a spouse or a friend, you know, whoever you might be living with. So then I ask the question, is if this is how I introduce my day, something might be missing here. And this is the kind of the point that I like to point out. When you walk up and down, so we're in Chicago, about 3 million people if you're in this city and the metropolis, and you ask yourself, all these people that you pass down here, you know, what about their days? If you're, you know, interested in asking such a question, what's going on in their days? So you can see, you know, got a lot of individuals dressed up, going to offices. You figure they might be lawyers, architects, whatever they could be. But what about the stuff that you don't see inside? What about the stuff that you don't notice? So let me tell you a little bit more about my day. 6:30 I wake up. 6:35 a.m. I must, and I do mean must, take my 500 milligrams of Depakote. Depakote is basically made to treat bipolar disorder. And I think I lost my screen again. Okay. Yes, as I was saying, Depakote is made to treat bipolar disorder. And it does help a bit with the depression, but more than anything, Depakote is made to take down the manic side of it. So, of course, you know, when it comes to issues with bipolar, of course, you have the highs and you have the lows. Some people without things like Depakote, or some a little bit older things like lithium and, you know, these sorts of things will have, you know, levels of mania that, unfortunately, sometimes you get these statements like, oh my God, I wish I could be like that. I'd get so much work done. Well, I'm here to tell you that if you have not personally experienced it, it is absolutely awful because you just cannot stop. There's chemicals in your brain just telling you that you're going to go, 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 even though you haven't slept for 3 days straight. It just keeps happening. Fortunately, I'm pretty well balanced. So long as my wife isn't listening, nobody will argue with that. So then how about when I come home? 9:30 p.m., that's typically about the time when I like to start reading, take about an hour, take my Depakote again, another 500 milligrams. Problem is, when I first started taking Depakote about 3 or 4 years ago, we had switched over from something else. 3 weeks after I started taking that, I became extremely suicidal. I was very, very depressed. I was eating something about 300 calories per day. And, I mean, if anybody has seen the video, it's clear that I do like my calories. But I couldn't fathom eating. It was almost like a heroic effort just to put down some chicken and orange juice, and my wife would fight with me. You have to eat something. I just can't do it. Unfortunately, no pill is perfect. When you take away the mania, sometimes it gets you to focus much more and pushes you down to the depressed side. So now I have a pill called Seroquel. And Seroquel is really interesting because it actually will balance the Depakote and bring up the depression and get you nice and even. But it has a great side effect in that it takes your anxiety almost completely away. Yes, of course, it works for you because obviously everybody has different chemistry. You know, when it comes down to it, the very last thing that I hope and pray for every day is that I'm going to sleep. Because there are side effects of Seroquel, and one of them, and people don't like to talk about it very much, is that you can actually have extraordinarily psychotic nightmares while you're taking them. And for the first month, I didn't sleep terribly well because every day I would have nightmares that I was being pushed and pulled and my body being taken apart. And I would wake up almost on the hour, usually about an hour and a half after I took it, usually yelling and completely sweaty, and then my wife would come running out and wonder what happened. Fortunately, I'm at a point right now where everything is going well and it's great. But the point of all this is to say that as you're walking and passing people, you don't know this person in this gray suit that I know you can't see out there. He could be going about his day, but there might be things about him or the female that's with him that we just don't know about. So it's just so important to discuss these things, and you know that's why the foundation upon other institutes, foundations in place stigma is just such a a noble and important cause, and that's why I say it is a bit personal too, because as I go through this, what's the first thing we hear if you announce something like this? Well, you must be weak. Well, I didn't cause this. I didn't wish for this. I didn't wake up one day and be like, you know what? I could go for a little mania right now. So we'll kind of move on a little bit here. There we go. So what's in a name? As we go through school, we learn all these codes, the hundreds upon hundreds of codes with, the little pieces at the end that add things to the codes for the books that we recognize. I am not old enough or have been in the job long enough to have one of the first 3 books, but I I started with the DSM-4, and I said, yay, I finally understand. And they said, yeah, no, in October we're going to switch to 5 now. So let me tell you how pleased I am that I have to take my LCPC exam with a book that I barely know right now. So terrific. But what's in a name? To be positive. Diagnosis as a positive, a name to put with the face. If you've ever talked to somebody, some individuals receive a diagnosis, they'll be like, oh my God, I understand now. This is amazing. I actually have something, tangible to sort of fight and to work with. As we know, we don't really cure mental illness, but we help cope with it. We build up skills, and when you have a name to put with the face, this is your time. You can say, yes, you are going through PTSD. You can take a little bit of a load off to say, I didn't cause it, it's not part of me, but now at least I can figure out, well, these are the medications I can do, these are the types of therapy I can do. Great. Problem is, with every positive often comes a negative. Unfortunately, diagnosis can be a negative to be stigmatized, and that's what we've kind of discussed over and over here, and you'll hear me say it a lot because it's just so stinking important. So when it comes to diagnosis, as we talked about, just a little bit extra of a positive, as I said, a name to be treated, a common language. The DSM, although, sometimes I disagree with a lot of what it is, and I don't believe that everybody fits in these neat packages, does allow me to talk to other professionals like psychiatrists or psychologists or doctors to a point, MDs. We can say, okay, we have an individual that's facing bipolar, okay, so we can kind of give a bit of a common language, and now we know that this is what they're going through. Now we're aware, if we're introspective enough, to realize that person A who has bipolar 1 is not going to be the same as person B, but at least there's a few little commonalities that you can kind of discuss. Personal recognition and understanding. So now we're talking about from the clinician's view. So I know that, that I have to watch for things. I have to watch for things like my energy level starting to kick up more and more and more. Because when you go into a hypomanic stage, you're very, very productive, your goals are getting accomplished more, but you have to be careful. Because if that continues to increase, and all of a sudden you're going to be into that manic phase, and now things become unstoppable. Because one of the biggest problems with individuals that have bipolar is when they come in and they get into that manic phase, well, whether you like it or not, it does kind of feel good. So people will stop taking their medication because they figure, well, I've taken it so far, and look how I feel right now. And then the mania continues to get worse. What some people don't understand a lot is that mania can't actually come with psychosis, severe psychosis. We can have people go through very hardcore hallucinations and delusions. We have an individual that I've treated many times in the emergency room, and she would come in and tell us all the time, I'm Dr. So-and-so, I'm Dr. So-and-so. Well, then we come to find out that she actually is a licensed and certified MD. And because she has this awful disease and this disorder that she has to work with a lot of times, she gets hypomanic, tells herself that I'm feeling much, much better, and then she stops. She doesn't take her pills anymore, and then it just becomes worse and worse and worse to where we end up having to take this person and unfortunately hospitalize them, and it's rough. When you work in a hospital, it's great. You can feel the very, very tangible and immediate effects. I help this person. But there is nothing in the world fun about let's hospitalize somebody, period. But doing it against their, against their wishes when they say, nope, absolutely not going to go. And then we have to pull out that form petition, and I have to write a story, and I have to be incredibly negative about this individual who's just going through a bad time right now. Why are you putting somebody up in this hospital when they don't want to go? Well, they're having severe hallucinations. Maybe they, self-harmed. All these things that I have to write. Here's this person who just wants to get through the day. I'm going to sit there and talk to you and write down these facts. And guess what? She's not doing well. She's got to go upstairs, like it or not. So what about the negatives? We talked about stigmatization, and then we talked about overcompensation. Overcompensation is interesting because when you get into the professional field and you start treating other individuals, what happens when somebody with bipolar comes into my office for the first time? Well, I can have a real dangerous thought and say, oh, he's got bipolar 1. I know exactly what he's going through. It's terrible. Because as soon as you start thinking that, you actually start labeling that individual like, you're me, I am you, so I know exactly this worked for me, so it must work for you. It just doesn't happen that way. And when we go through things like the CCE and do our paperwork for our final, for our final courses, they ask us, to pick something like CBT or existential and kind of work through the process so they know that we've grasped the theory. But anybody who's actually worked, whether it be an internship or in their own practice or any setting, tells you that you can't just take, one type of process such as CBT and say, that's it. Everybody's going to be treated by CBT, and they're all going to go through the exact same homework assignments, because very, very quickly you're going to find that you're going to lose everybody, because one quote-unquote mandate is not going to fit, for every individual type of hurt. And then, of course, there's the name to be blamed, and this is something that I really hate hearing about. It hasn't happened much to me, and I'm very, very fortunate with that. So sometimes when people get a diagnosis, they'll say, okay, let's say they have bipolar. Okay, we'll stick with bipolar. And then they'll go home and maybe they'll make a mistake. Oh, well, that's the bipolar, that's mom or dad saying, well, you're bipolar. You just must be making a mistake. It must be a disorder. Well, how about the fact that somebody just messed up? Not everything that happens in your life has to be tied to this little number or to this code or this definition of who you are. But it happens all the time. And it's really ugly to see somebody who comes in who just wants help, and all they get is maybe an hour a week with me, maybe 15 minutes in the psychiatrist's office every month. But then you realize for the other 23 hours of the day and then the other 6 days of the week, I don't have anything to do for them. They're out. If you give a homework assignment, that's great. But now they have to go out into that rough world again, and all of a sudden they're going to be stigmatized and they're going to be blamed. So all the work you do, noble, powerful, whatever you do, as soon as you walk out, they are in the care of the environment, their families, the people around them. So it's something that I usually ask people that are going to go into therapy to think about, that when you leave or when they leave your office, hopefully what you've given them helps, but you've got to understand that when they're outside, it's kind of back to square one and they're on their own every day. So a very, very, very brief bit of statistics. So the question comes is, why would somebody who is working in a therapeutic process or in a setting be talking about this? Because it is much, much bigger than we think. So a couple of studies were done. University of California system at Irvine took a study, it's anonymous, back in 2008, and they polled their doctoral students there. And all of these doctoral students were psychology-based, so they were going to go on to either be in the academic world or more than likely in the PsyD world and be professional. 17% of those students back in 2008 reported a serious clinical mental disorder. 30% of the doctoral students reported some sort of mental health issue which had some sort of negative effect on their well-being and their performance. Now, if you've ever been through any school, especially grad school, you're going to know that there is no such thing as a stress-free day. You have papers to do, a lot of reading to do, and it's constant, 5 classes at a time, getting ready for dissertation if you're in a doctoral program, getting ready for CTE or thesis if you're in your master's. It's a lot. It's a hard work. But when you take something like this and add it on top, now you've got someone who has a clinical issue of maybe anxiety or depression. So you take stress that's already hard enough, and then when you add it on top, now you've got you've made it much more difficult, because at this point in time, you've taken stress and put it on top of an anxiety disorder, and it just continues to get worse. Or perhaps you have somebody who already has issues with clinical depression, and now they got a C on an exam, and unfortunately, when it comes to grad school, a C is usually not passing. So you've got the student that does really great, maybe has just a bad paper, and now all of a sudden depression can get worse and worse. 2009, APA did another report, a bit of a follow-up, and found that 19% of psychology graduate students reported suicidal ideation or an attempt. I mean, it's such a heavy, heavy, heavy number, considering if you put 100 people in this room right now that were all doctoral students or masters or combination, that 19 of them, a good several rows, have thought about suicide. Maybe they've attempted it. Maybe they've made a serious attempt of it. That's just something that it's so shocking to me. Not so much that it occurs, because we know full well that mental illness is huge. It's a big, big problem. But so now you have to talk about the fact that these individuals are likely going to go and treat others. But it is so much safer than people like to think, because unfortunately, thanks to media, now I'm a big fan of Criminal Minds. Love that show. That's that's my wife and I's way of knowing that we're probably getting older and approaching maybe more middle life. And now we settle down to let's just watching Criminal Minds. We actually have a little game we play. Every single time we ask the other if we want to watch Criminal Minds, we have to come up with an analogy. We cannot use the term Criminal Minds. So ask like silly questions, be like, so hey, do you want to watch pathological psyche? You know, we come up with these little words for it. You know, it's just something silly we started doing. Like most of us, we have no idea how it started, but it just keeps happening. It's a great show. And if you can divorce yourself from the, you know, the unreality of it, it's just so entertaining. You know, you can watch it all day, but then you hear things, and they'll say, you know, they'll be doing, the BAU will be doing a report on somebody. Well, he was schizophrenic, okay? So somebody like us, you know, we could say, okay, well, we know that's not really realistic. Problem is, how many of the percentage of people watching something like Criminal Minds are psychology students or psychologists or psychiatrists? And no, okay, it's just entertainment factor. But no, instead we see somebody who's been diagnosed with schizophrenia or borderline personality disorder, and now they've just murdered 7 people. And all of a sudden you're getting killed over and over and over again for, you know, the layperson to say, holy cow, schizophrenia is dangerous. Then you find out somebody has schizophrenia, and you're like, oh my God, this person is just a step away from snapping. Well, unfortunately for them, the statistics, well, actually I should say fortunately, the statistics don't really follow up with that, because they say out of the millions of people that have schizophrenia, less than 1% will actually have a violent act, and only a portion of those violent acts will actually be something that will be deadly. Now, of course, we want to ensure safety. You know, it's very important. But we can't run around and say to everybody, like, okay, well, this person's got a diagnosis of schizophrenia. He's going to snap at some point. You know, he's going to go out and murder somebody, because it's just not true. Can it happen? Of course it can. But somebody that doesn't have a diagnosis can turn into somebody very violent, too. So it's important to battle that and to continue fighting back and saying that media is fun, it's a great time, you know, but you have to understand that whether you like it or not, it just isn't, you know, it's not truth. Catch my screen back again here. Okay, so I've got some great examples that I love to throw out there. Dr. Marshall Linehan. This is the individual, the PhD, who actually invented dialectical behavior therapy based off of a combination of sort of a CBT and Zen Buddhism. It's made almost exclusively to treat borderline personality disorder, but not a lot of people know that just a few short months ago she came out and explained that she is you know, fits the diagnosis for borderline personality disorder. So, you know, immediately you can see this person who's accomplished so much, and then you can start battling back on this, you know, things like stigma from Criminal Minds, you know, and you can say, hey, look, here's somebody who's a great success story. Dr. Kay Redfield, Jesus, I don't know if anybody's heard of that. She wrote some amazing books on her battle with mostly the manic side of bipolar. She is a psychiatrist. She is very strongly into the use, the beginning uses of lithium and then later Depakote. She's run several different institutions, you know, in the UC California system and all over the country. And she has very, very, very severe bipolar 1 disorder, and her manic symptoms would usually be for, you know, thousands upon thousands of dollars in debt. Talking about back in the 80s, when $1,000 meant a lot more, you know, than it does now. And yet here she is, you know, she was one of the leading psychologists when it comes to lithium and Depakote and treating individuals with bipolar. Dr. Frederick Reeves, PhD, schizophrenia paranoid type. He's accomplished a ton, written books, helped people all the time. Name that's not as well known, Dr. Joel Breving. He's a psychiatrist, MD, who has bipolar 1 disorder. It just goes on and on and on. And then you have to figure all the millions of names of therapists out there that aren't named, you know, who may not be as prevalent as somebody like Dr. Linehan, you know. So it's out there. The success is much more of the rule than the exception. Okay. So only a couple slides left before we go to questions. So the question becomes, is it here to understand or is it here to compensate? So the positives of mental illness when you're in therapy, and now I'm talking from the clinician side of it as myself, and believe it or not, there are certainly positives, as long as you're careful. A basic understanding of your client. So when I do have that client that comes in and she has bipolar, I can at least get a little bit of a basic understanding. Okay, well, I know what it feels like to go through mania. I know what it feels like to switch right back to depression. I know what it feels like to wonder when the next, you know, swap is going to come. Cooperative experience. Always have to be very careful what you share in therapy from yourself because A, it's not our session, it's theirs. sometimes just letting a little bit of a crack open and slipping out there can do some amazing, amazing things. Most people who are in, a lot of people who do therapy have CADCs or have, masters or doctorates and do substance abuse therapy end up, letting go that, hey, guess what? I've been sober since such and such time. I've been in this since January now in behavioral health, and come February, I explained to them I have been clean as of May 7th from Vicodin for 5 years as of May 7th, So it's good. It's not about me, but it gives that idea. It's like, you know what? This person at least has a grasp of what's happening. And one of my favorite parts, an introduction to humanity. So many people will come into a therapy session and say, this has got to be the perfect person right here. Granted, I am. There is nothing that I've done that's ever been wrong, except everything. But the point is, joking aside, they come in and they see this individual who there is a power differential when you're there. It doesn't matter your class, your race, your sex. When you're in there, you are, sometimes they'll call you the doctor even if you're not, but you're the doctor. And they're coming in to get help from you. So there is going to be a differential, whether you like it or not, and you have to treat that with such amazing care. But when you introduce a little bit of humanity to yourself and say, guess what? I'm imperfect too. Now, it might take a few sessions for them to realize, oh, God, they're not who I thought I was. But all of a sudden, you'll start seeing these little bit of connections. There's a great story, if you don't mind if I share, I'll make it as quick as possible. I had a 16-year-old girl who suffered, I'd say probably moderate PTSD from sexual assault, and she had learned to hate her body. And she's such a pretty young girl. She had a great life, and yet she had a maturity that I wish I could force feed to most adults that I've met before. Okay. So when she came through my door, she actually would sometimes, they have this thing called speaking through an avatar. So she used to have this little stuffed bunny that she'd bring in. And sometimes if she was having a really hard day, she didn't want to talk to me as client and clinician. She wanted to talk to something else. She wanted to be safe. So she would actually take the stuffed bunny and she would put it on the front of her face and she'd talk through that. And then when she felt comfortable, she'd put it away. Well, and then, afterwards, we had ended up finding this room. The doctor who owned this practice didn't even know this room existed. He was like, yeah, I've been here for 5 years and never opened this door. I'm like, okay. And he opened this door. And there was another whole-size office on the other side. And we're all just like, you never thought to look at this? And we found boxes upon boxes of toys, clothing. Now, granted, most of the clothing was in great shape, so we sent it to homeless shelters. And we had some, other children there that were like 6 years under. And so we would take the toys, when we call them fiddles, something that they could play with while they're talking. And I found this stuffed cat. So I took the stuffed cat and I was going to actually save it and give it to one of my colleagues because I knew that, her 6-year-old really loved cats, so I kind of just stuffed it in my desk. So she comes in one day, my client, and I can see her carrying her bunny, and I'm just like, oh, this is going to be a bad session. So she picks up, brings it out, and all of a sudden it clicks me. I'm like, I got the cat behind me. I'm going to try something. And I grabbed the cat and I put it in front of my face, and we talked like that for 5 minutes. For the rest of the 6 months, she never brought that bunny back again. Because now she made that connection. There was humanity like, oh my God, this is the silliest thing I ever seen. But that's what I'm talking about. You got to throw that little bit in there and say, I'm silly, I'm imperfect. There are things that are wrong with me all the time. And of course, there are negatives. And whether I like to focus on it or not, they are real. The loss of ideal perfection can be very, very stunning and difficult for individuals to take. So here's a therapist. You're supposed to be the strong one. You're supposed to be, the protector. And now, all of a sudden, oh my God, I'm talking to somebody that has bipolar disorder. What the heck? How am I going to work through this? Manipulation of real or perceived weakness. We can pretend all we want, but this does happen. People will manipulate therapists. People will manipulate doctors, whether it be for primary gains such as finding a place to stay, or secondary gains of getting medication that they might have an addiction to. Most popular would be things like Xanax and Ativan. Because these are things that, when taken in higher doses, can make you very high. Loss of professional distance, and this is where the overcompensation comes in, and this is our side of it. So now, as I talked about before, here's my person who has bipolar. I have it too. I know exactly what this individual is going through. And now that professional distance is gone, it can cause boundary issues. And then, of course, a false notion of understanding, the inflated sense of similarity. Again, you're bipolar, I'm bipolar. That's it. I know everything. I know everything there is to know about bipolar. Terrible, terrible, terrible misconception. So what about protection for yourself and for your client? And whose protection is more important? I'd argue it's probably the client because they're here, you're there for them. You always disclose only when it's beneficial to them. When you have that hour, it is never, ever, ever supposed to be about you. Throw little things in there if you need to kind of catch them. But you've got to make sure you keep down that, that ego side of you is saying, like, oh, what about my recognition and stuff like that? It's a real thing. When you're in therapy, you want to be recognized. You just say, you close, you're like, did I just do a good job on that? But you never make it about you. Discussing transference. People don't like to do this so much, but it's so stinking important that when you have something, that kind of gets in between the two of you, talk about it. Ask questions, Is that something that makes you terribly uncomfortable? How can we work around it? And of course, never assume your diagnosis is 100% similar. But then you have to take care of yourself as well. How many times do we preach self-care in school, in internship, during your actual job? Self-care, self-care, self-care. And then what do? You go home and you just watch TV and you don't even think about it. You could take mini vacations. They don't even have to be a day long. Just say, I'm going to separate from the world for right now. I'm going to read a book, do something that's completely non-academic, non-professional, healthy. But we don't do it that often. And unfortunately, I can be a terrible example of that. Personal therapy, I think, is a really important thing. Even if you don't have anything that's diagnosable or clinical, you're going to listen to stories that are going to be harmful to you, whether you like it or not. When you talk about it, I won't, of course, go into details, but when you hear some of these stories of, war veterans of combat fatigue and combat stress and, things like sexual or physical assault, you can pretend all you want, but it's going to hit you at some day. It might be years down the road. You could go home every day and think, okay, I'm home, my job is over here, I'm over here. But at some point in time, it's going to break you. Not break you as in you'll never be able to work again. It'll start cracking in, and you'll be like, holy crap, I just spent 10 years listening to people talk about being harmed by others, and it just hits you, you're like, how do people do this, And then the questions start pouring in. So getting your own help is so very important. And then, of course, if you do have something that, is more clinical or severe, psychiatry is not a terrible thing. People have this awful idea that, well, I go to the psychiatrist, I give it up. Well, it's a start. Taking a medication, a balance you that so you can actually discuss these things is where you start. And know when your limit is insurmountable. But you'll notice that I put temporarily next to it. You're going to have days where you're going to go on and I just cannot do this. I'm having an extremely bad day and I'm going to harm somebody. Take the time off. I mean, it's so much. I'd so much rather have my boss be mad at me than go in and harm somebody because I'm just not present or there. But that's what I say temporarily is. See if this limit is insurmountable permanently. And it does happen. I was a paramedic and I couldn't stand watching it, so I quit. Now I moved on here. But could it be temporary too? Maybe it's just something that you work out, and when you work it out, all of a sudden you're stronger for it. So the final word, determine what's the best option for you and your client. Is your client safe? But also you have to understand, are you safe? Is your family safe? Is your job safe? Because if you tell somebody at your work what's going to happen, a lot of people have this idea, well, I work with a bunch of psychologists. They're going to be like, hey, bravo, good for you. It doesn't work that way all the time. Only one person at my office, and that's why I don't mention where I work necessarily, only one person at my office knows I'm bipolar, and I told her that because, we're very close, and she was my old boss from the hospital. And I said, just, if you should notice that my energy is way too high, tell me. Then I can, go and see if there's an extra dose I can take, or maybe take a day off and just get away from it. It never happened, but there's nothing wrong with having that safety net. But you can't tell everybody. Because some people you're going to tell are going to have a reaction that could threaten your career. It's difficult. So I always, no matter what I do, I lead with this last quote because, whether, you can leave your politics aside, but what President Bill Clinton said way back when was mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of, but stigma and bias do shame us all, and it's just so true. So now we'll have a little bit of question time, but if anybody would like, this is my email, gierslpc@gmail.com. I decided to throw that little extra dash of narcissism in there like I keep talking about. They're like, yeah, put my last name in there, But it's really stupid, though, because in about a year and a half, all of a sudden we'll be like, well, do I change it and put the C in there, and now I have to tell everybody? But thanks for listening. Does anybody have any questions, be it online or here?
I have a question. Yes. In regards to supervision that's provided to you, do you feel like there's any, what would you need from a supervisor? Maybe that would be different than someone else?
Well, it's actually interesting because for those of you who don't know, when you are an LPC or an LSW, you have to have 2 years of supervision. When it comes to supervision, it's usually in groups. When you take the time, it's not the best time. I personally actually will go to my boss's boss, who is the LCSW in charge of supervision, and I have my private, hour with them. I choose to do private as opposed to group. So I like an individual amount of it. And the question I typically like to ask is not so much, did I do this wrong? How can I recognize that maybe, something manic or something depressive is happening, and, how can I keep it from harming others or harming myself? Because at the end of the day, you do have to take care of yourself. We always talk about CPR when I was on the ambulance. They say, the layperson does CPR. The only time they stop is when A, you realize that or when somebody comes and takes over, B, you realize that the person is legitimately deceased and there's nothing to say, or B, or 3, and people will notice is when you become exhausted. And it's the same thing. Because when it comes to CPR, if an ambulance pulls up and they got to work on somebody, now they have a second patient who's having a hard time breathing. Same thing. So you can have a client that's having a lot of problems, but if I'm hurting too, well, now all of a sudden we've got a much, much bigger problem that could be avoided. So I think in a full answer, private, one-on-one, session would be one of the best things I can, pick out. Somebody that you trust at that level. Online. All right. Well, if anybody is watching student-wise, I did say I would like to introduce, just for the next minute, if nobody asks, we can conclude as well. But if anybody has any questions as far as they're getting close to graduation, need to know anything about, what the job search is like, what testing is like, some of the things they've asked me sometimes is, you have a master's, why did you take a bachelor's position? Like, it is little things, but I'll give another moment if anybody has.
Kind of question that I just wanted to say, this information is valuable to us. So thank you so much, because there's so much for our students.
Absolutely. It's so important. I don't say we as in this room or online, but we as a society just don't want to talk about it. So I guess if there's no questions, I'll close with my last sort of statement here. Did you have one?
There's just a comment.
Okay.
Glenda just says, thank you. Awesome.
Okay. No, if it's the Glenda I'm thinking of, then yeah, that might be from, from one of the hospitals I worked at, but I won't divulge. So it's something that's kind of always struck me when it comes to the whole discussion about stigma. Now I'm not talking about professionals, just period. Because if we look at how, how big it is and how big a problem it is, and really when it comes down to society, you have one or two choices. People think that you have all these gradients of how you can take care of something, and stigma really comes down to one or two things. When you're confronted with a problem that's either severe enough or global and massive enough, such as, mental health, stigma, or even stigma about AIDS and cancer, whatever it might be, you have a choice. You can either take the simple route, where you can put your hand over your mouth as hard as you can, cover your eyes, and plug your ears and choose to ignore it. And that's what we do in this society all the time. We don't want to talk about these things. People ask me, how is that the simple and easy and safe right? Well, it is simple because what's the easiest thing? If there's something wrong with my neighbor, the simplest thing and the easiest thing would be just, no, I don't see it, I don't notice it. But why would it be safe? It's safe because when we choose not to talk about, quote unquote dangerous things, or dangerous to our own feelings, it's the safe route, at least temporarily. Because now I've taken away from myself, and I'm like, okay, I don't have to focus on this, I don't have to think about the fact that people have committed suicide and all that stuff, it's safe. The problem is that safety is only temporary, because at some point in time, it's going to come out. We talked about one of the most recent things, Robin Williams, and that's become, a humongous factor that we discuss a lot in groups. We talk about Robin Williams was beloved by almost everybody. One of the funniest people I think I've ever met, but look what happened to Steve Darrell. Somebody is suffering that hard, yet nobody really knew outside. I'm sure their family members have had an idea, but how many of us saw that coming? I don't think I'm strong enough to focus on that, so I raise my hand and say, I never saw that coming. All of a sudden, it's a shock. I'm like, oh my God, he's gone. Now, his loss is no more important than somebody, that is, relatively unknown, but it sure speaks volumes, to look at. So the other choice is the complex choice. It's the unsafe choice, and that is to actually boldly go head on say to myself, I am not going to sit here and listen to people talk poorly, in society, or even on an individual basis of somebody who is, perhaps DD or disabled, somebody who has schizophrenia, somebody who has bipolar, because it's just terrible, And it's the unsafe choice because you have got to break out of your bubble to do it. It's not hard. I am the king of avoiding confrontation. Like if somebody asks me something right now that was confrontational, I feel like, okay, well, I'd like to thank you all for coming. Have a good day, that kind of thing. But, no more. I want to be part of that fight. And the greatest part is you can be, be the example that, I can't remember exactly how he said it, be the example you wish to see or something like that, and that's what it is. Because it becomes a domino effect. You take the unsafe route, and all of a sudden somebody sees like, wow, it made a difference somewhere. So there you are. So are there any last questions?
That actually led me to a question. I think in terms of the takeaway for people who don't have a personal experience, who are learning more about others' personal experiences that can really take a message to get out of that safe zone and face stigma head on even in their clinical services, could they focus on some positive examples? I think like you offered in Marshall Lanahan and Giers Jameson, if they don't have that personal experience, is that something you see play into the clinical session? Is that an opportunity for those positive images to enter as examples?
So when you say a positive image, are you talking about like me being the positive example, or?
Yeah, in the way that you can share the humanity of some real experience, that it's not a negative label, that people are recovering constantly, living in a balance and struggling, but like anybody else.
I absolutely will always be an individual that would admit, I like to be very real about things. You're going to lose people if they find out. It just happens. But the great majority of people actually do see it as a positive. They say, well, it's such a cliche, but they say like, well, if he can live through this, why can't I? And it's not to be a comparison to say like he's better than me, he's worse than me, he suffers more or suffers less, but it is a very positive experience. Some of the examples are, I have a woman who suffers PTSD. She does not suffer bipolar, but she had a horrifically traumatic life. It was absolutely awful. And she sees, me, and she said this many, many, many times. She says to me, I can't believe that everything that you've gone through, that you're still here. You've got, your master's, your licensed therapist, and now you're going through school again and stuff like that. And it does become very positive. And so it's kind of almost an add-on to that. So people who are going to be clinical, be it a student or somebody who's already working that wants more information, you just have to ask people sometimes. It's funny because when you have somebody that suffers, it actually opens up a door. You're like, oh my God, I can actually talk freely about this, as opposed to constantly cowering, thinking like, oh my God, I hope that this person finds out that I'm bipolar, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to do this and that. It's just so freeing. Because in my opinion, 99% of therapy for the client is the cathartic experience. It's just get it out there, and then we'll deal with it. Of course, you take it carefully, for somebody with a traumatic experience, But so I don't know if that answered your question, because I tend to sort of, veer in 10 directions. But otherwise, I do believe that said. I haven't seen anything online, and so I'm going to conclude. I greatly appreciate you joining me. Again, anybody want this is a public email, so it's mine. If you ever want to get a hold of me, you can do so. Otherwise, I'm looking to do a little bit more work here. So I'd like to thank you again for joining me, and have a good day. Yeah, I know the point is. And now the 2.5-hour drive home.
Oh, no.
But I chose to do.
You're going to have a fun drive.
Yeah, I know. I was very naughty, and I bought myself a Camaro yesterday because I got military disability, which is non-taxable. My wife's part of it was the horse that we bought for her, and I was just like, I got to do this. I want to do something like this for a long time. It's funny because I actually called my mom. I'm only 36 at the time, but I called my mom, and I said, that